And now for our Friday fact check. The president is calling it Obamagate, accusing President Obama and former Vice President Joe Biden of conspiring against Michael Flynn. But our own NBC investigation this week, as well as new reporting today in the Washington Post and the New York Times, prove that is not true. This week, President Trump's acting director of national intelligence, Richard Grenell, declassified and turned over to the Department of Justice a list of Obama administration officials, including Obama and Biden, who had asked for the identity of the person who had been overheard on intercepts talking to the Russian ambassador after the November election. That person was Flynn. While the president and his supporters are claiming that such a request was part of a conspiracy to frame Flynn, in fact, those requests are routine. They're common. They occur thousands of times every year, including this year. When he became National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn went on to lie about what he had said to the Russian ambassador, to both Vice President Pence and then to the Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, and then to Press Secretary Sean Spicer, and then to the FBI. That led to their recommending that the president fire him. He later twice pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, until more recently withdrawing his plea and the Attorney General then approving that the prosecution be dropped. A very unusual occurrence. Joining me now are Ben Rhodes, former Obama White House Deputy National Security Advisor, and Frank Figliuzzi, a former Assistant Director of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division. Welcome both. Frank, first to you. How unusual is it for a prosecution to be dropped and for the FBI to ask questions to someone as important as the National Security Advisor in the White House, ask questions about him having lied several times to different officials about his conversation with the Russian ambassador, a conversation that was picked up by an understood intercept of the ambassador, and of course Flynn was caught in that, having multiple conversations with the ambassador?
Yeah, the answer to your first question, how common is it for prosecutors to move to dismiss their own case after a guilty plea? Extremely rare. The answer to your second question, how often does the FBI interview officials to determine whether the case on them is valid and try to resolve a counterintelligence concern as to whether this person poses a continuing threat? Very common. Very common. Now, the National Security Advisor incoming to the United States, pretty uncommon. But the fact that there's a validly predicated case, that you have a National Security Advisor that's been paid by Russia for speaking engagements, photographed with President Putin, acted as an unregistered foreign agent of Turkey, and now sits in one of the most sensitive positions in America, you need to resolve that, and that's what the FBI attempted to do. And so when we hear Obamagate, there's no such law. I tried looking up a law called Obamagate, and I couldn't find one. But what this is all about is that there was somehow a conspiracy among the Obama senior officials to gin up a case on Flynn. And by all reports, what we're dealing with here, Andrea, is a valid attempt to resolve the question of whether the transition team of Trump, including Flynn, could be briefed on sensitive classified information, or whether they had a problem in the form of Flynn.
And from my reporting, Ben Rhodes, there was a critical meeting January 5th, 2017, and my understanding is you were not one of the 5 people in that room. The 5 people in that room included the president, the vice president, Sally Yates, who was then deputy AG, Jim Comey, FBI director, and also Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor. It followed on a meeting that you probably did attend, I'm not sure, but the point in that meeting, in that critical meeting, which has been well documented, and Sally Yates has been on the record on this, and that Susan Rice actually wrote a memo to the file on this. In that meeting, President Obama apparently very explicitly said to Jim Comey, the FBI director, you know, I don't want you to tell me about anything that's going on in a law enforcement context, because he had a firewall that was traditionally held between a president and the AG on law enforcement issues. But he said, as President of the United States, I need to know whether my National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, can proceed to disclose everything that we know about Russia to this incoming National Security Advisor, or does he have a counterintelligence issue? Am I characterizing that correctly?
Yeah, Andrea, you're characterizing correctly. I was in the preceding meeting, which is a briefing about the investigation into Russian interference in our election, which was briefed to Congress and released publicly as well. This was a short follow-on meeting to really answer the very specific question you point to, which is, could we be comfortable sharing sensitive information? It was not at all about giving any guidance or direction whatsoever as it related to law enforcement matters. We didn't do that in the Obama administration, unlike the Trump administration, which has wildly politicized the Department of Justice, most acutely in letting off the hook somebody who literally pled guilty to lying to the government about his contacts with the Russian ambassador that was causing concern in the first place.
And to the best of your knowledge, did President Obama know, or did Vice President Biden know, that Jim Comey was already looking at a law enforcement issue and was planning to have FBI officials question the incoming National Security Advisor once he was sworn into office?
My knowledge at the time, it was simply about this question of sharing information. We were very deferential to the Department of Justice and the FBI about what they decided to do in terms of law enforcement investigations. And look, Andrea, it's very simple. If the actual interest here was in transparency about unmasking, well, they could be transparent about the more than 16,000 unmasking requests that the Trump administration made in 2018, which just shows how routine this is. If they're interested in transparency around Michael Flynn, they could release the transcript of those phone calls with the Russian ambassador. Why don't they do that if they're so interested in getting to the bottom of this? They are not. They're interested in taking the word gate and attaching it to the word Obama to distract from the fact that we're in a pandemic and a depression, in the hopes that the media and our political culture will follow that like a shiny object. It's not true. It's bogus. Trump can't even describe what it is himself. All that we were doing was expressing valid concern about whether you want to share sensitive information while we are still the responsible governing entity in the United States of America with somebody who might be compromised from his contacts with Russia and his work, as Frank said, with Turkey.
And Frank, one indicator now, what Comey actually said to this group of 4 other people is still classified. We don't know that. But one indicator that there was information then shared so that they were not warned that there was a law enforcement issue is that Susan Rice then went on to spend 12 hours one-on-one briefing Mike Flynn about incoming threats and handing over 100 separate National Security Council reports to him as a part of the transition. I want to ask you about the unusual events where Judge Emmett Sullivan, this week has asked for a retired Judge Gleeson, to become an amicus and become a part of this upcoming process where he will review the prosecution's request that the prosecution be dropped.
I think the judge has valid concerns here. Look, he's very familiar, intimately familiar with this case and with Flynn, and understand he's coming at it from a couple of perspectives. First, 2 officials have now come forward and said that their words were mischaracterized and distorted by the Attorney General in that filing to dismiss the Flynn charges. Mary McCord at DOJ and Bill Priestap at FBI. Secondly, the judge has actually essentially come forward and said, look, you got two problems, Mr. Flynn. You either lied to the FBI when you denied talking about sanctions with Ambassador Kislyak, or you lied to me when you admitted talking about sanctions with Ambassador Kislyak. Which is it? You're a liar one way or the other. So he's got to get to the bottom of this. He's going to get to the bottom of this. And I don't think that Attorney General Barr should rest easy and think that this is going to sail through the courts.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.